Okay, so hello everyone. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll get right started as people join us. Welcome to another session of our Mentee Cross Cohort webinar Learning Opportunity Series. Today's topic will be around stakeholder buy-in, values proposition.
Susan, I accidentally muted you.
It's okay, no worries.
Sorry about that.
All good. All good. All good. Yeah, so this will be covering a lot of ground today, and we're joined by one of our Dash mentors, Mary Miller, as well as John Concklin from the United Way of Greenville, who will have a lot of great content for us to share with us. Sorry. Just really quickly, this is just our agenda. We'll have some quick information from the program office. Then we'll kick it off to Mary to lead us through some opening remarks. John will do a quick presentation, and we'll have time for Q&A and discussion. And we'll wrap up by just sharing some upcoming events and announcements for folks just to be in the know of. So just a quick reminder on audience engagement. If you're going through any technical difficulties, feel free to just send me a private message or email me. My contact information is on the screen, and as well as ways that you can participate. We welcome raising hands, or you're welcome to submit your questions through the chat box. We'll be looking through and getting to your questions at the end of the presentation. So, but definitely feel free to chat throughout as well. So very quickly, so I am joined by my colleagues, Anna Barnes and Miriam Castro, on this webinar. We are probably the familiar faces that you'll see in terms of anything to do with the Dash mentor program. If you run into any support issues or have a question, I'm probably the first person you should reach out to. And then that's more context for how where they will be involved as well. These slides will also be shared on the online all-in online community group, as well as in a follow-up email. So stay tuned for that. So you'll have opportunity to look through this list as well. Just some information for folks. If you haven't been to one of these sessions.
I'm not sure if you're advancing the slide, Susan, but we still see the first one.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Perfect.
Great. All good? Okay. So the program office, we are available primarily to help navigate questions around contracts and program expectations, collect evaluation data and feedback on the program, elevate and amplify lessons and stories from the mentor program. So again, feel free to reach out anytime with any questions or concerns. Oh, that was too far. So, and in addition to that, this is something new that we're trying for this year, the cross cohort learning sessions. So we're hoping to, we hope you've been finding these sessions helpful in terms of advancing any goals that you've developed through the mentorship, as well as share experience and expertise from other mentors that you might not be working with. As well, hoping that these are opportunities to discuss, share, connect with peers. And we'll do these about once a month. So we do have some more lined up for August, September, and October. And these are optional. We encourage and recommend participating should they be helpful for your goals. And while the topics are subject to change, we will let you know in advance. But we'll share more on the schedule as well. Very quickly on the all-in network engagement. So as some of you might know, Dash is a part of the all-in network, and so and the Learning Collaborative. So as part of that, there's different vehicles in which we help promote learning from peers and sharing knowledge from the field, which include sessions like these, webinars, as well as in the past, you know, we've done peer site visits and in-person and virtual meetings now, and also connecting with folks through the online community and the all-in affinity groups, which I think some of you might be involved. But if not, here's some information on the All-in Affinity groups. We've got a set of groups going on. The Accountable Communities for Health is launching in August, so there's still time to join that one. And if after this conversation you'd like to continue and connect with deeper on these topics, Mary is also leading a United Way and 201 Partners affinity group. So if you're interested in joining any of these groups, feel free to email Miriam. Her contact information is on the slide. So I talk a lot. I mentioned the All-in online community quite a bit. And so this is a platform in which we encourage you to connect not just with your mentee, your fellow mentees, but also with other All-in subject matter experts or peers throughout the network. Our open forum is pretty popularly used, as well as different discussion groups. And so if you want to take a look, feel free to browse around. And also, we did just do an online demo this past Monday that we'll chat out the link for if you just wanted to get a refresher or know a little bit more about how to utilize the All-in online community. So yeah, I'm going to pass it now to Mary to lead us through some remarks. So here you go.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So for some level setting, I wanted to recognize that some folks in our room are staff at United Ways or 211s. Some might collaborate or partner with these organizations. And some of you aren't connected at all, but are still involved in maybe a collective impact or multi-sector collaborative kind of workspace. So whether you work at or with the United Way or not, I think some of the lessons shared here related to stakeholder engagement will ring relevant to a lot of the problems we've identified and common themes and learnings that we wanted to share. So to introduce myself to those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Mary Miller. I'm the manager of 211 Innovation at United Way Worldwide. So as a member of our 211 team, I specifically help local 211s, but I also work with local United Ways to connect them to best practices, pilot innovative new projects, and communicate their impact and lessons learned. So prior to working for Worldwide, I worked for a local United Way in Southeastern Virginia, and there I built data sharing partnerships between community-based organizations, hospitals, and public health partners in our region. And so I developed a community indicators dashboard and supported our bi-directional referral network. So I connected with Dash prior to working at Worldwide and doing this mentor program. So it's been a great long journey. So I won't read this whole slide, that's who is United Way, but I wanted to include it for general awareness. United Ways are locally managed, so every one of them is an independent organization, benefits from their local expertise, and they have varying sizes and scales and capacities of each of them. United Way Worldwide provides support to this broad network of local United Ways in various ways. Our impact team specifically provides strategic supports like frameworks, building national partnerships, or developing kind of scalable projects for United Ways to adopt. Can you go to the next slide, please? On the 211 side, there are over 200 211s across the United States. 211s might be managed by United Ways, about 50% of them are. They might be managed by other entities or state organizations even, so varying sizes, just like United Ways, it could be 1 or 2 employees for the entire organization to a huge team really built out. So those of you who aren't working with a local United Way or 211 but might be interested, if you want to discuss further about local projects and you want kind of a warm connection, feel free to email me. I will share my email in the chat. Happy to try and connect you to the right place, or if I don't know someone there, we probably have someone who does. Next slide. So for part of a brief introduction, I wanted to share, we just got data back from a recent impact survey from 211s that I thought might be relevant to all of our interests. 211s around the country submitted data to us related to the types of connections they made last year. We had about 27.8 million connections across the country over the past year. This comes out to something like 54,000 calls a day. And so we also asked some targeted questions related to kind of data sharing and care coordination. So one of interest to me is kind of these standardized screening tools and assessments for social determinants of health. So happy to chat further about those, but I don't want to keep us here for too long. So related to our topic today, John agreed to speak with us about his work. I first connected with John when I worked at my local United Way, and he very graciously agreed to share his prior work on this project with me. He previously worked at United Way of Greenville and was willing to answer my many questions over email. I don't know if he remembers, but I remember feeling like I was needling him about, oh, what about this and how did you do this? So I'm super excited that he can share this with you all and we can chat about it. So with all of that, I'll turn it over to John.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. Looking forward to speaking with everyone and hopefully answering some questions and sharing my experience. So just to level set, and we can move to the next slide, what we're talking about here is United Way of Greenville County in around 2016. So this is when this journey begins. At the time, and this is really just for United Way people, I'm a former United Way person, so I still speak this language. $20 million resources under management. It's a 1B or a 3C, depending on if you're using the metro size or BPI. And frankly, I don't actually know if we're still using, I still say we. I don't know if those are still being used, but hopefully that helps sort some of that out. And the population in Greenville County is around 500,000. So Greenville is situated halfway between Atlanta and Charlotte, and is close to Clemson University, if that helps anyone. So my specific role at United Way of Greenville County can encompass a variety of things, as all of our work, all of our roles do, but functionally it sat between data, partners, and fundraising. I also led public policy and impact initiatives like VITA, that's the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, AmeriCorps, and other initiatives. But through my job, I would hear the same questions over and over again. And I was the person who, at my United Way, twice a year would twist, turn, spin, hedge, rephrase, repackage all the impact data that we were collecting. And so this is the data that would go out to partners, it would go out to our board, it would go out to our donors every year. And each time it kind of felt like I was pulling a rabbit out of a hat, as you all, I'm sure, know or see. And would provide sort of just enough information to slide by, but not actually answer the question. So if we could move to the next slide, I'm sure some of these questions will look very familiar to you. I'm sure you've heard how many of these are duplicated. We've been doing all this stuff. Shouldn't things be better by now? Why is the poverty rate not lower? Why is the third grade reading score is not higher? Et cetera, et cetera. What does all of this mean? Partners would ask, why are we reporting all this information to you? This doesn't make a lot of sense. Board members would constantly want to talk about move the needle change. And then everyone was saying, well, we need more individual stories. Like, how are 37-year-old Asian men, no one would ask that, but how are 37-year-old Asian men interacting with our system, right? And so these were all questions that I could not answer because of the limitations of the way that we were collecting information and the questions that we were asking. And so in 2015, 2016, we thought about how we wanted to solve this problem. And we can move to the next slide, please. The problem basically was accounting error. So as the slide shows, so on the left hand, you have an individual. That person goes to 4 different organizations, as we sort of intuit that people do, be it a health organization, be school readiness, education, financial stability, whatever the case may be. They go to multiple places because you can't get everything in one place. And then the funders of those organizations then ask them for data. And the organizations report to them just numbers, right? And I'm sure we're all familiar with this. But the funder sees a number of 4 instead of one person achieving 4 different things or having 4 different experiences. And this becomes an issue that we were getting into dead ends with the data, right? And so this was sort of at the heart of the problem that we were trying to solve. And this becomes, it seems a little tactical, but this does actually come back to us later when we talk about sort of building trust. So at this point, I always attempt, and I don't mean to patronize everyone, but there's always, for some reason, it's good to revisit these things. I always want to clarify the difference between aggregate data and individual data. If we could move to the next slide, please. And more specifically, what they can do and what they cannot do. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm ahead of my slides here. So I'm sorry. The problem that the counting error caused were as follows. We were working with, at best, 6-month data, but usually it was a year old. and organizations were trying to make decisions based off of this data. So in other words, we were making, we were attempting to drive to a new location, but receiving directions after we were supposed to turn, for example. There was no sense of duplication, good or bad. So there's good duplication when people go to more than one place and receive two different services that complement one each other. There is bad duplication when people go to two different organizations and receive the same thing, or if they continually come back. And then there was not an ability to determine changes at the systems level, like a move the needle, for example. And then this one, 4, it becomes very important, and especially in the context of the summer of 2020, we have no understanding of how individuals are interacting with the system. So now I think for the clarification of the aggregate and individual level data, if we can move to the next slide, please. So aggregate data is basically the census. Most United Way data is aggregate data. It's really good at describing large groups of people at one point in time. It is not good for developing trends unless you compare the same data every single year, which the census does, but United Way not so good at that. Aggregate data only answers sort of what, when, and where. That's an oversimplification, but that's helpful maybe. And aggregate data, as I mentioned, cannot describe the experience of individuals. Conversely, individual level data, this is like student data or health data, usually protected because it's individual. Social media data, like Facebook knows that I don't know, visited CNN this morning, and that's individual level data. It's really good at describing an individual's experience. It can begin to answer why and how. It is not a cure-all, but it can begin to answer why and how. And then individual level data can become aggregate data. Aggregate data rarely can become individual data. So it's just to level set with everyone, because sometimes we all get turned around on these. So as such, individual level data, disaggregated data, if you will, central data source was really the only answer for us in Greenville in order to solve the problem, the counting error problem. And but we entered into this discussion with some very clear parameters, which we show on the next slide. The first was that there were products out there, things like ETO, for example, or Charity Tracker, or even HMIS to some extent, but they were either too costly or the existing products were not customizable or alterable. So in United Way portfolios or in collective impact portfolios, everyone's going to measure something a little differently. They're going to change because they have multiple funders, et cetera, et cetera. And we needed the ability to change with them, right? And so even if 1 or 2 and 2 were addressed, the hard line that the partners were talking about, the people who would have to put in their data, duplicate entry was a non-starter. They were already having to use 2, sometimes even 3 databases. It was a hard no if we were going to force that upon them. And so as a result, we built it ourselves. So if we could move to the next slide, I'll give you sort of an overview of how that worked. And this is probably beginning to look familiar with what you are doing. Many of you have come to it different ways from what I understand, but our pathway started with our programming in SQL to create a set of proof points. And then it led us to a high-tech company to build it for us. But bottom line here is sort of how it works. The partner organizations would export their database as is, no modifications, once a month. That's very different from the hand key entering that they were doing before twice a year. They share it via an encrypted server. The database automated it into, we would use R and SQL initially to automate it into data points that United Way wanted, but then we had the company automate this for us. And then, so there was no more time spent fiddling with language, no more human error, no more time really at all put into it. So it just sort of happened. We also were able to use an API to sort of backdoor into HMIS, for example, to where no one even had to do any of this. It just came to us on a regular basis. And so, in other words, if I, as a participant, went to X organization in 2016, then went to Y organization in 2017, and Z organization in 2018, all three of those interactions would show up and would be combined into one line on a spreadsheet attached to my name. All of a sudden, United Way was sitting on a data set that no one else had. And more importantly, we could begin to measure directly against vision, mission, and cumulative effects of investments at the individual level. All in all, and we can move to the next slide, please. All in all, close to 30 organizations participated. Sorry, this slide is a little out of date. It was started at 13, but now we're at 30. And it started with the income financial stability. So think workforce, financials, literacy, housing, and it is branching out to other areas like childcare facilities, Head Start, things like that. And it was aimed at determining if individuals had met or were on the path towards meeting any or all of the following. So in other words, we were attempting to describe self-sufficiency, financial self-sufficiency rather. So one was earning a self-sustaining wage. At United Way of Greenville County, we used the self-sufficiency standard, but that is very similar to ALICE, another United Way tool. That is asset limited, income constrained, I think, and employed. Credit score of 650 or higher, debt to income ratio of 40% AGI or less, spending less than 40% on housing, and then access to a mainstream banking system, that being a checking account or savings account. So that's generally how it worked. There's all kinds of cool data. I think the next slide shows us some implications, which I won't go over, but I've just included because this is just sort of a laundry list of things that I've collected over time when I've either brainstormed what the implications are or people have told me what the implications are. We won't need to go over it. If we could forward 2 slides, please. That's the one. That's the one we want. Okay, great. So what really doesn't make it into this story is trust and how it was built. And so if I had to characterize the thing that made this go where others haven't or stalled, it was realizing that we operate in a people business. People interact with organizations. People work at organizations, people want the data, and people are going to have to share and support and make this thing go. Data is the easiest part of this. Technology is the second easiest part of this. The third easiest part is money. The fourth and is sort of the legality of it. And then the fifth, the ethics, and then finally, sixth, the hardest part is simply just the people. And in those order are the things that we sort of have to contend with. So we'll start with the first. The general strategy for me, and I was the person that was doing the asking and some of the data manipulation, but I was doing the asking and sort of telling the story. So I was front and back, but not sort of in the middle. The first strategy was to get to yes by building trust. This took 2 years of asking people, having coffee, hearing about their children, their grandchildren, checking in with them. This was totally human. There was not a lot of technicality thrown around on these sort of journeys. There were some people that were just there with you. They were ready to go. But there were also people who were very hesitant, which was totally understanding. And there were personal barriers, there were intellectual barriers, and then there were just physical, like financial resource barriers. And we had to work through all of those in order to get to yes, and that required trust. So my role was to simply listen to what they were saying to me and help them solve their problem. You could tell if they wanted to say yes, right? And if they wanted to say yes, then there was going to be a series of issues, and we just worked through them. And then the third one, and this was pretty United Way specific, but maybe funder specific, is to deconstruct the power dynamic. And so the way I'll describe that with United Way is that I was a funder, right? So they had to pick up the call when I called. And they were really used to United Way creating a bunch of unfunded mandates. In other words, we want you to do your work differently, but we're going to give you the same amount of funding, or we're going to reduce your funding, and we're not going to balance the scales in other ways. So the way that we could balance scales is like give time back, make it easier to be a partner, fewer meetings, or providing other resources. And so they were kind of cautious in the way they said it, but they really looked at this as basically they wanted to say yes, but there were some structural legal capacity barriers. And so we sort of set out to solve those things. What we kept on hearing was, and this gets pretty specific for United Way partners, but they were saying that one, the time it took to produce these semi-annual reports was a barrier. In other words, they had a frontline staff person who likely had a master's in social work, who was there to interact with clients, taking 2 weeks out of their year to report aggregate numbers to United Way, which was dubious information anyway. There was also difficulty fitting in with language. So United Way is really good at like creating logic models and things like that. But in the very practical, everyone defines things a little differently. And so they were spending a lot of time organizationally thinking about that. They also felt that United Way's data didn't reflect their work, which was a big pain point. And they really just never knew what we were doing with any of it. And so when we started getting down to brass tacks with that, we realized that there were some shared priorities. The first was we all wanted to understand impact better. That was simple. And we also agreed that the individual level data was going to be able to describe that in a different way. The second was we all embraced data privacy as first and foremost. We recognized that in some cases we were dealing with potentially a vulnerable population, and that it would be very easy or tempting to monetize information, which is not something that we wanted to do. And so we sort of carved out that data privacy was going to be, we'd rather go slow and stop for months at a time than to break something and then have to go back, which then this begins to diverge us from big data or Amazon or like Facebook or stuff like that. The second was that we wanted to focus on human solutions, build the technology, put the money, and build the data around humans as opposed to the other way around. And then ease of use for the people that were actually going to have to be using it was another sort of parameter, I guess a balancing act, because these were all equal to one another. So from my end, being a funder, I realized that aside from being a person that could functionally act as a backbone entity, the part that I needed to play was to carve out some cash. So a few $1,000s is what we started with. Internal to United Way, we called it the pizza fund. So for example, one organization wanted to say yes. They said their barrier was old technology. And so, okay, no problem. Here's a grant for some new computers. No questions asked, no reporting. This gets you to yes. Others wanted to get together to discuss, not a problem. Like we'll host lunch, we'll provide lunch, we'll talk this through with you, not a problem. Another said it was staffing. We realigned our Vista program around it and thanked organizations for signing up. And others needed, good legal documentation. That's fine. We got plenty of lawyers on our board. We had them draw something up for us and happy to walk you through it. And the other part is that we simply had to share back what we were doing and be in constant communication. In other words, inclusion was high on the list. So basically my job was to be a problem solver, remover of barriers for organizations. The biggest hurdle actually for me was convincing my own United Way to stick with it when they saw, even when it seemed like nothing was happening. But in the end, this is a people business, and just sort of like on the development side, sometimes you need a coffee meeting to get things going. So I guess the real big takeaway for me is that there is not a silver bullet in this. This gets down to the foundations of working together in a community with other people. So I sort of lightning speed went through that, and I'm realizing now, but I would, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And you can really ask me anything I can tell you, I will answer. Okay, I'll start with the one in the chat, actually. So there was a question about who I met with to build trust. So this was two-pronged, sometimes three-pronged. There were, the first person that you had to talk with was the person at the organization that would be dealing with that organization's data. They were the ones you were going to have to get to buy in, because they're the ones that were actually going to have to do the work. They were usually the first to say yes, but then they were also the ones that were aware of the ethical, legal things that we needed to work through. The second was the executive. That was the person that was inevitably going to have to say yes or no, who would eventually be held accountable if something went wrong or if it went right. And then the third, because we were dealing with nonprofits, usually there was a board chair or a lawyer that we would also work with. And technically, legally, this all worked. Like the technology we know works. Legally, we know it's possible. It's getting people to say yes, which was a whole other thing. And it had nothing to do with legal documents or technology. And it had to do with just knowing one another. I can't stress that enough. Other questions?
I've got one, John, that I thought of when you were on your slide about self-sufficiency and kind of the aims of some of the shared measurement. Did you identify those goals with partners? Did they just naturally line up because of the kind of the focus area? So it looked like, I can't remember all of them right now, but some of it was credit score related or whatnot. And so some seem like best practices maybe in the topic area. But was that, I guess part of my question is, was that early stage? Like, were you saying we would love to be able to share these across, or did you come to kind of creating measurements later?
This one is a little bit of, this one's more art than science. So we all sort of intuit the end goal. And in every field, there are probably some benchmarks for what could be deemed success if like we sort of measured those. And so this was a matter of connecting the end to the beginning. And that's a really vague statement, but at the tactical level, all of these organizations were measuring, like, you know, did somebody get a job? Where is their credit score? You know, how, you know, are they housed? And collecting sort of the front end of this information. What those organizations weren't really measuring against were, you know, is this person, they weren't putting together the cost of the house with the income, right? And so I had to be careful not to be prescriptive, because we knew where we needed to go. And it was partially, so the way that I went about it was that I created a visioning exercise with the big group, with the 30 that we were sort of soliciting. and sort of asked them to think bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger to get out of their organizations. And through that, that group got to what we had sort of sketched out as what we thought the high-level outcomes should be. And so we were able to marry what we thought was best practice with consistency building. Yeah. Let's see, the list of elements from easiest to hardest. Okay, so the easiest part is the data. That's easy. The second is the technology, also relatively easy and simple compared to, well, it's pretty simple. The third is money. Money is easier than you think. The fourth is the legality. There are some things you do have to work through in terms of liability, in case of a data breach, who needs what training, who has what permissions, etc. The fourth are the ethics. So there are some ethical questions that communities have to wrestle with around this that are very serious, and I'd urge you to go slowly on these. And then finally, the hardest is just people. It's a people business. People will say yes or no to you for all kinds of different reasons. And the people who say yes immediately, you want to slow down. And the people who say no immediately, you're going to want them to speed up. That was the list. I'm happy to expand upon that if anybody wants. Ethics. Yeah. Okay. So I would urge everyone that's creating any type of shared data system to not model themselves off of Facebook or Amazon. We are not doing that. The reason is we don't want to treat data as currency, which those organizations do. Data for us is information and decision-making tools. And tools of figuring out where to allocate resources or describe a story. So I'll start with an easy one. There is a program for individuals in recovery from substance use. We don't want to know that people are there. So we need to create a firewall from that organization sending information in. So that's an easy one. The difficult one is who gets to know who's in the database. So when I was working there, there's just two of us. We went through data training. There was only two of us who could ever look at an individual level and see where people were. And I could see really powerful information. There was one person who would show up like clockwork every 3 months. And it seemed like this person would get a job. He would lose his job. He'd show up. And it was like clockwork. For several years, this was happening. And what we realized was that it was due to a previous incarceration. I could not tell that story to anybody. I couldn't go to the organizations who were working with him and tell them that because that would be a breach of privacy. Or at least we hadn't sorted out who could know that and what we could do with that information. There were other instances where like sharing in between organizations, how much are people allowed to know? There are some people who want to know everything, but there are huge risks involved with that. But if you don't give people enough information, then the data system sort of is just taking away time and not adding value to working. I'm happy to speak more about ethics. Working in a low-income rural area, no data experience. Yeah, so Jim, data is, I wouldn't actually describe anyone as low data experience. Everyone makes decisions off of data. Now, it might not exist on a computer, but everyone uses data to make decisions. So what we're talking about is getting data into a central place. So this thing really could exist on a sheet of paper and then sort of build out from there. So I would not start with technology in that situation. I would bring people in and talk about, you know, what do we want to focus on? Like, what's a big goal for us? And then get it to something that you can measure, and then we can talk about how we're going to measure it, like what technology we need or what organizations need to be a part, play a role. But the mistake that I made early on was focusing on technology, focusing on data, and people don't care. They care, but they get lost easily. And so make it a conversation about building, and then eventually someone's going to say, well, I think maybe we should build something or use a Google spreadsheet or something like that. And then you can sort of start building from there. Interested in tech specifics on a smaller scale with a focus on how to broach the technology. Or Catherine, do you mind clarifying that question? Catherine H, I think.
In the meantime, so everyone should be able to mute and unmute, but if, oh, I see Catherine just messaged. She shared, what did you use in terms of API? Did you start with Google Sheets, etc.?
Sure. What did we use? Hold on, I'm sorry, I'm blanking. We used Tableau to start out with. But how did we get into that API? I don't think that we started the API until we had already done the proof points. So the first tool that we started out with was we asked a couple of early champions, if you will, to send us 3 months of data packets over using a Google or using a spreadsheet. And from that, we used our programming to see if we could come to a proof point. And the proof point was we wanted to find a person who went to more than one place. And then once we proved that, we could do that. We wanted to see if we could describe that person's experience and get it down to one line. And then from there, we wanted to see over a greater period of time if anyone moved to those self-sufficiency benchmarks. So we were really wanting to find someone who met all 5 while they were interacting with the system. Turns out that never happened. Most people could achieve 1 or 2, and then some of them already had another. And so from there, we started using SQL. And then from that point, we upgraded to Tableau to begin visualizing, and that's when we activated the API. But all of this can be done with no technology, just a little bit of our programming, which I got certified and learned for $100 online. It's just a matter of using it to keep up the skills. But you can do it with hardly any, with no money needing to be put in. Google Sheets work too. Other questions?
If I remember right, John, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but when I talked to you, it was what I thought was fascinating was you were matching, I think it was like name, birth date, and address or something from those early adopters to say, okay, do these people attend multiple services? That's what we have been trying to do at my local United Way forever, was to get kind of that shared case management or record system.
Mhm.
And it helps my brain move away a little bit from having everybody use the same technology system or getting everybody to sign on to this one case management or record keeping thing and saying, no, we could just export from what you have, match it up together, and then see what we can find out from it. Oh, that
Yeah.
was really cool.
Yes, that's still going on. What I will, I did broach something. Coming out of the summer of 2020, we didn't realize this at the time, but because of the ability to tell individual stories, this kind of tool is incredibly useful when describing equity, or in the case that inequity within the system. So I do remember a statistic that came out of what we were looking at that we didn't know before, but that white men were significantly more successful at achieving outcomes than any other group. And the ones, yet African-American women were the group who showed the most consistency of showing up regularly and putting in time and what appeared to be effort, but that group was the lowest, achieved these outcomes at the lowest levels, which speaks to the issue of equity. And that's, they have been digging into that a little bit more over there. I fortunately am no longer with that United Way. Okay. Error rate for person matching. We got that down. So that is a matter of the factors that we use. So we got that down to like 2 or 3%. I will say, yeah, I mean, I can see, but I think 90% is pretty good when you can't use social security numbers. And so we wouldn't use social security numbers, and we wouldn't use, there's something else we wouldn't use, but we were using a mixture of last name, phone number, address. But also, if you can use more and then you set your benchmark for duplicate matching at a lower threshold, you can probably get that higher, but then you're working with a few asterisks there. We only had 20,000 entries into the database. 11% were duplicated that we could identify. And then there was not many that we could not make a decision on. But we were also small enough to where we could pick up the phone and ask, which helped. But I do imagine over time and scale, 90% is actually pretty good. Truthfully, I don't know. You seem pretty far ahead. Oh yeah, food insecurity. Well, that's a whole other thing. But so I guess I gave up on trying to get organizations to speak the same language, because based on their board and based on their funders, they were never going to want to speak the language that they were not going to want to speak a shared language, even if they wanted to work together with another organization. And so as this system was a technological workaround, it is also a language workaround, in that it does not matter to me how you define food insecurity. Tell me how you tell me what food insecurity is, and then if we can get the parameters and then match it up with the same information from a different organization, United Way in that case would compromise between the two, and we would assign our own language to it, if that makes sense. So the other way that we talk about it is there were some people who would measure wages at the hourly level. There were some people who would measure it at the monthly, and there were some people who would measure it at the yearly. We didn't want you to change any of that. Just tell us how you were measuring it, and then we would correct it and standardize it for everybody else, so that no one else had to do that. We were sort of taking on that role. I hope that helps. Okay, other questions? Since we're getting close to the end, I just would say, please feel free to reach out anytime. It might seem like we're far ahead down here, but truthfully, we've paused for a while because we cannot work through some of the ethical issues. And we just don't want to move forward until we have these things answered. And so, yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. Every community can do this.
Excellent, thank you. So I just want to say thank you so much to John and Mary and everybody for the great questions that we had. And as we close, we just have a couple of reminders. And meanwhile, Susan's going to put an assessment out so you'll see a poll pop up. Just want to let you know that. And a couple of program updates and reminders. Just a quick reminder of the dates of this whole mentor thing, set to end December 1 of this year. And just, keep that front of mind. It's already almost August, which is, can somebody please tell me how that happened? I have no idea. And then, yes.
Really quickly. So I can't launch the slides. I think you might be able to though. So I can take over with the slides.
Okay, cool. We got this.
We're trying to trade off. Thanks for bearing with
Susan.
us. Yeah, thanks for bearing with us, everyone. We'll take it over. And just to answer a question in the chat, yes, this recording will be shared with everyone. And so feel free to reference it every now and then. And also we'll share out John's contact information if you wanted to follow up and ask more questions. But yeah, so let's see. Thank you, Miriam. I was just about to ask you guys. Okay, cool. So as you answer some of our quick questions, these are also all anonymous. We'll just kind of go over these reminders. So if you haven't already, please submit your work plans to your mentor ASAP. These will guide your one-on-one conversations. We hope those have been helpful. A question in the chat, can you remind me if there is a template for the work plan? Yes, there is. If you want to shoot me an email, I can get you that template as well if it hasn't been already provided by your mentor. I can also include it in the follow-up email for this. In the very early on in the program, we also sent out a getting started toolkit. So feel free to reference that as well in these last couple of months that we've got together. So fast, time flies. We wanted to just also kind of talk through some upcoming events as part of All In Dash. So we've been talking a lot about the 2021 All In National Virtual Meeting. And so you'll see the themes up here as well. And we just wanted to announce that the registration is coming next week. We will be providing more information on the grantee registration code that's forthcoming. And so we'll have 2 seats per mentee team. And we'll be sending out more information as that comes. We know we've been getting some questions about who can participate, will we be able to accommodate people? And so please keep those questions coming. Move on to the next slide, which is around the CIE Summit, which is also another event right around the corner. And this one is hosted by 211 San Diego CIE. And so the dates for that are September 8th to 10th with a pre-conference on August 11th. And so there are several options that we encourage you to pursue. in terms of funding for attending that if you're interested. And so you're welcome to use your Med-T budget for that in terms of paying for your spot. If you are United Way, my understanding is that there is a professional development fund that you can tap into. And if these are not viable options at this time, we encourage you to apply for a DASH scholarship. We are accepting submission requests until July 21st. So we encourage you to apply ASAP if, you know, this is something that you would really like to attend. And we encourage applications from communities who haven't attended in the past or wouldn't be able to attend otherwise as well. And so that link will also have a link to the CIE Summit page if you wanted to check out what the summit is about. I believe the agenda isn't quite live yet, but it will be in these coming weeks. And yeah, so thanks again for joining us today. We wanted to end on, this is the schedule for the next upcoming meetings. So we've got 3 more up until October, and we'll send out the holds for that as well. Again, these are optional, highly encouraged. We hope these have been a very great help for your participation in the mentorship. And again, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to John and Mary for that wonderful presentation. I think a lot of us got a lot of helpful information from that as well. And we'll see you in our next upcoming webinar on August 18th. Thanks so much.
Hey, Sushna, should I end polling or just kind of hang out for a little while with the poll?
You can end polling.